Good morning, everyone, and welcome to today's EnRoute webinar. My name's Bennett. I'll be the moderator for today. Our presenter is Aaron Clapp, the application specialist at SAI. He knows just about everything there is to know about EnRoute, and today he'll be walking us through the redesigned and reworked automatic toolpath capabilities in EnRoute 7. After the presentation, we'll be able to answer any questions you have either about what Aaron discusses here or any other EnRoute topics. So feel free to put those questions in the chat and we'll answer as many as we can. We are recording the webinar as always, so if you want to review anything that Aaron discusses, we'll be sending you all the link here this afternoon, so look out for that. And with that, we're ready to get started, so I'll turn it over to Aaron.
All right, sounds good. All right, so today we're going to be looking at the new ATP user interface and setting all that up. We wanted to kind of go over just a brief overview of the new ATP so that you guys have, a good chance to see, what's new and some different things like that. And we want to make sure that we get everything laid out so that you know kind of where everything is compared to where it used to be. So that's kind of the goal today here. So ATP is automatic toolpath. So if you're not familiar with it already, it's a method in which we bring in parts, we apply toolpaths to them, we nest those parts, then we bring your driver into the equation, we output the file, and then create output for you, all automatically for you. So it's kind of a seamless process. This can be used in several different ways. There are definitely some light versions of ATP that we have some videos on if you're interested in, if you have a light version of ATP, or if you have the full version, you typically would use a design software. Again, in the new user interface of EnRoute, you should be able to go to the file menu and pull up ATP or automatic toolpath setup, or you can do that up here as well in the menu bar. So one of the goals was we wanted to try and make ATP a little bit easier and kind of flow a little bit better with some of the workflows and things that you might be doing. And one of those things was trying to make sure that as we go through this, it kind of steps you through the process a little bit easier. So instead of having to click back through a bunch of tabs, the new interface kind of loads you through each different step as you go through. So first of all, we start with the Start tab. So when you first pull it up, you're going to be seeing the Start tab here. This is going to be the first thing that you really need to be doing when you're using ATP. So whether you're using the active drawing function, using ATP to toolpath and nest your active drawing, or whether you're doing that to some selected imported files. So if I click on selected imported files, I don't necessarily have to have an application. I'm just maybe importing DXF files or some kind of files, and then application list file. So application list file is going to be if you have KCD or you have one of these other major manufacturers listed here. Now, the nice thing about ATP is not only has it been reworked kind of from a visual standpoint, but it's also been reworked from kind of the ground up. So a lot of the stuff maybe that you might not see running in the background has also helped the new ATP. So for example, now it's much easier and much more simple for us to add new design applications. So if you have an application that maybe say is not in this list and you would like to have it added, that makes it a lot easier on our end so that we can add some more in much more easily without having to create a new build of the software or a new patch. It can all be done fairly easily and then can be added later to the software as a patch. So it's a lot more flexible in that term as well. So we're going to go down the route of using a design application. In this particular case, I'm going to use KCD because that's the list file that I have in this particular case. But the process for all of these is going to be basically the same. Now at this point, we also have options over on the right. So a lot of these buttons are going to be tab specific now. And so they're not going to always show up at the bottom, mainly just to avoid confusion. So at this point, if you have an ATP file would be a file that has all of your automatic toolpath settings. So each one of these tabs has specific settings that are set to it. So for example, here, I have some things set in here, my materials, processing, all this stuff. I have it saved in an ATP file. And so what this allows me to do is just load these files, and I've got it set up here as Aaron's test. That's my ATP file. It's got all the settings that I need in ATP to run test with this particular job. So I'm going to load that here if you have one. If you don't have one, this is a good time to kind of start one. So go ahead and go through the entire process of setting up a job, and right before you output, come back to this tab and save the ATP file. And so that's a really good way to kind of get that started, because it'll save you. It's very similar to how EnRoute uses strategies. So strategies are there to help you click on a toolpath that you use frequently and you don't want to have to keep setting it up all the time. This is going to be the same way. You load up ATP, you click on the ATP file, it loads all your presetted settings for a given type of job, and then you're ready to go. So some of your ATP files might have labels. Maybe in some jobs you don't do labels, or maybe in some jobs you prefer to nest it in this particular way, and others you do this. You can have multiple ATP files and load them up as necessary, and things like that. So that's a really great way to do that. And of course, there's all kinds of different scenarios where you might have a different ATP file, but this is where we load those up. I already have mine loaded up. As you can see, it's already loaded with the correct ATP file setup. So I'm going to go ahead and just continue. So our next one is parts. So this is basically the next progression in the step here. So at this point, I'm going to add my list file. Now, if you were using the select import files, this is going to look a little bit different. So now you see you don't have an add list file, but you have an add files button. So here I'm going to add DXF files individually or as a group, so I can select all of these and add them in at the same time. I can add all these into my list that I want to process. This is for applications that don't use a list file. Obviously, these applications do use a list file, so it makes things a little bit easier. But if you have an application that doesn't use a list file, you can still use ATP. You just use this option here. So we go to parts. I'm going to say add list file. And basically what this list file is, it automatically loads in all my DXF parts from the list file. So you can see here, I've got my list file, and I can add multiple list files if I need to, if I have multiple jobs that I want to run. And here I can define, well, this is all defined for me, but I can see all my part names, the width, the length, the thickness, and all this stuff. This is all information that comes in the list file by default when it's exported from KCD. So we've got this part. So we've got our list file, we've got our quantities, we can adjust those like normal, and everything kind of seems normal here. So that's our next step. Next is mapping. Now, again, we wanted to keep this in a very easy to kind of understand progression as we go through here. These are kind of the natural steps that you would typically take. So that's why we rearranged everything in order to be a little bit more naturally flowing. So here, this is the part of ATP where you're going to load in all of your strategies. So this, again, looks very familiar. This is actually going to look almost the same as your previous one that you've used in EnRoute 6 before. So you've got your add layers, remove layers. If you're doing this manually, again, if you're not using a list file, you're going to probably add and remove layers as necessary. Or if you have an active layer, you can use active layers. Again, this option is going to be for those who are using the non-application method. In this particular case, because we've loaded a bunch of parts into my parts list, I'm going to say use parts, and it'll automatically fill in these for me. So when I first load this up, there's not going to be anything in here. And I'm going to click on use parts, and it'll load on all my parts for me. Now, because I used an ATP file, it automatically loaded these in for me, and it automatically set all my strategies here. Now, I've got some pretty generic strategies set up here, but again, we've got all of our toolpath settings here for our strategies, if we're using small parts, things like that, and then what options we want to output. Do we want a toolpath? Do we want to nest together? Use depth, design that we have, all that's right here. Next, we go to our material tab. Now, what's new here is our setting up our materials. Now, in EnRoute, you can also set up multiple materials. So currently, I have my default material. This is just the material that in the software or in the ATP that I can use by default. But because of my list file, I actually loaded up a second one for me. So in this case, we want to use this one. So I can always put that at the top, or I can move these around. So whatever I want to be my preferred material, I can use that. And not only that, I can also add different materials. So if I have a job that requires 2 different kinds of materials, I can add them and quickly modify them here. So now I can change the name of it, or make a new one, and make any adjustments to these materials that I need. So this is a new feature for EnRoute, is managing the materials inside of the material screen a little bit better, so you kind of know what's going on there. I'm going to leave this one at the top. In fact, I'll just remove this one since I don't need it. And then we'll move on to processing. So we're going to keep moving through here. So processing. Now, this is going to be where a lot of your settings from before were kind of clustered into one screen, and they were kind of all over the place. So we've kind of organized them a little bit better. So you have your nesting options, which are going to be your nest position, so which corner you want to nest in. The type of nesting. So we've got all of our standard nestings that we've had as before. These are our angle steps in case you want to rotate the parts. Most cabinet makers are probably going to do either 180 or 90. Your gap, your use holes. This is all your kind of your nesting options. Then new to this space is going to be your double-sided machining. Now, we're probably going to take a video at some point or a webinar at some point and do some very specific examples of double-sided machining. So look for that at some point. But we now support double-sided machining inside of ATP. So if you're looking for double-sided machining, whether it be for your cabinet software or for your files, we've got all kinds of options for what we're going to do with double-sided machining and how we need to rotate that and flip it and get it into position. Again, we'll go into more detail on that on probably a more specific video, so that you guys can have a very specific example of how that's going to work. But know that we do now support that as well. And that also, I'll also throw in there that this also supports, so when we say double-sided, we also mean 6-face machining. So if there's, we're talking about all faces, not just front and back. That can be front, back, or front and sides, top and bottom, and things like that. So for example, if you're cutting a door, you might have some hinge stuff if you have a like an aggregate head or something like that. So that also is included in that. And then lastly, we have our label options here. So if you are doing labels, again, here's kind of our option for double-sided. So if you're doing a double-sided front and back, you can also do labels on the flip side. This is kind of normal. You choose your label and then you choose the style. And of course, Avery are the standard, but and those are your typical type of settings there. So then the last setting, again, is output. Naturally, this would be the last thing that you do, and it makes sense to be at the end. We can choose to create output, and we've got some of our other settings here that are a little more random. They're not categorized necessarily, but they're kind of related to output. So we've got label output. You can turn on or off the label output if we want to. In this case, let's turn it off. We're going to do create. We can also do printouts, subdirectories. We can process these as single parts if we want to. All those options are in this one. By default, the output path is always defined by where the files are coming from. So for example, if we go back to our parts tab, I selected my list file as C drive and desktop, a folder called ATP files, and then this is where this is located. Okay, so ATP files, if I don't choose an output path, it's going to automatically send all of my files to the same folder that we chose the list file from. And that's kind of the way it's always worked, but we just kind of want to reinforce that here. If it's blank, that means that it's just going to go right to the same place that you pulled your list file from. If you choose, you can also click on this and have it output somewhere else. So if you prefer to have it not mess with the files and you want to save it, say on a network or something like that, you can do that. And then of course you have your prefix. So if you want to add some kind of a prefix to the job name, there's that, and then all of your options for your printers. So you've got if you want to set up your printer to print out the printouts. Also, one last thing here is we've got our surfacing setting. So whether we're using surface at top of plate or surface at bottom of plate. So that's going to be important as well. Again, all of these settings are savable. So in this particular case, I have them all preset and saved. So once you set these up, you can set these up and save them as ATP files, and you don't really have to worry about it again. Lastly, then you just have your typical strategy order and priority order for your different toolpaths. This is where you're going to tell the software, where one thing goes and where another thing goes in terms of, does your routing offsets happen first, or do your drilling happen first, or does this strategy happen first, or does that tool go first, or does it go second, and all that kind of stuff. The nice thing here is that we have updated this to make this a little bit simpler in terms of how do we move these around. Before, it used to be a little bit cumbersome in terms of trying to grab these and move them. Now it's just a simple left click and drag, and I've got some nice green arrows there that indicate where they're going to go when I drag it. So it's really easy to move these around compared to as before in EnRoute 6. It was a little bit tricky. You had to kind of click on one and grab it and then move it around. This is much simpler. We can just grab and drag based on how we want these to happen. I can also do that for tool order. I can see here, I'm going to grab that, put that above there. And then I also want drills, island fills, and then offsets to happen. So that's going to be that way. So I'm going to put my strategy first, then my tool, and then by the time I get to 3 and 4, it doesn't really matter. So at this point, because this will cover pretty much everything that I have in this particular file. So I've made changes. So I'm actually going to go ahead and save this one. Because I've made changes and I've updated my strategy order, I'm going to hit save my ATP file. That saves any of my changes that I've made. So now the next time I load this in and I use this particular ATP file, it's going to make these adjustments for me. All right, and so then I'm going to hit process parts, and this is going to start pulling in these files, nesting them, and outputting. Now the nice thing here is that while this is nesting, and this is probably not going to take terribly long, so it'll probably finish, but before I finish explaining, but the new 64-bit is going to be able to take advantage and make this process much faster. And so as you can see here, it's already creating parts and finishing them. This is significantly faster than this job would ever process in EnRoute 6. So that 64-bit processing that is built into EnRoute 7 now has now helped us get much faster nesting times. And so nesting is faster, tool pathing and then output all happens at a much quicker pace than it used to be before. ATP also has some other options built into it that allow for much more reliability in terms of making sure that the outputs come out the way that you need to, in terms of making sure that all of the output files get processed correctly and that you don't have any files missing or anything like that. Also, less crashing and other instabilities that might come with processing jobs faster. Those are some improvements there. So other things that we've set up. This is we kind of want to mention that. Oh, okay. So let's just look at this. The first time you load this up, it's going to show you all of your nests all at once. I'm going to go ahead and turn my layers off up there, and now I can see all my different layers as it nested them and Toolpath. And now if I go back to that folder, let's see here. Let me open the ATP files folder. Now you can see that it's produced all my XXL files and my label or my EMF files and pictures for my printouts, if I wanted to go back and click on these for the printouts. So all the files now are inside this folder that I had specified. So the big thing that we want to kind of take away from this is ATP is basically being rebuilt from the ground up. And this is not just a visual upgrade like we saw. Yes, that was part of it. We wanted to make sure that the process flowed a little bit better, especially for new users who are the first time seeing this or they want to get into it. The process makes a little bit more sense. The tabs are located in a meaningful kind of step-by-step order. Buttons are in the correct places and aren't transferring from tab to tab. So only the appropriate buttons are showing when you're dealing with a specific item. So it makes it a little bit easier in terms of the user interface. Not only that, we've rebuilt it for 64-bit. So it's faster, much more efficient. You can get things done quicker and have larger nests without having to sit there and wait forever for stuff to process. So that's an improvement there. And then also we're making all kinds of additions and improvements. Now we saw a few things for double-sided processing. So that's another really big feature. But the ATP process now that it's been completely redesigned from the ground up, that means that we're going to be able to add all kinds of new features and new abilities to ATP as we go along. So this is a really great thing for EnRoute 7, and ATP. So if you're a user of ATP or thought about getting into ATP, ATP is just going to get more and more powerful. We're going to be adding new features and adding new customization options and things to help you get the most out of your processing. So we're really excited about the new direction that ATP is going in. And we really think that over time, as we add new functionality, this is just going to make this a more and more powerful program or aspect of the program that you can use to make your business successful. So that's just a general overview of the new ATP lookout or layout. We hope this makes a little more sense and that you guys use it. And hopefully this makes things a little bit easier for you and that it works a little faster. We're hoping that it improves your processing times by quite a bit, makes you more efficient, and gets you down the road and getting you cutting files instead of sitting there processing things and trying to learn how to use the software. So any questions on ATP or on just about anything EnRoute related? It doesn't have to be about ATP.
Thanks, Aaron. While we wait for people to type up any questions they might have, I'll just mention that our next EnRoute webinar will be on October 19th, and Aaron will be discussing some of the new efficiencies in Toolpath and EnRoute 7, things like improved cutting logic, starting and ending. So yeah,
that'll be a really good one. You guys want to sign up for that. There's some new improvements to the toolpathing in EnRoute, so definitely sign up for that one. I'm excited about that one as well.
Just wait another minute here to see if anyone has any questions for Aaron.
Now, just as we're waiting for that, just as a kind of a reminder, many times automatic toolpath gets kind of a rap, where people say, well, if you have a design application, it's really good for that. But the way that the software works, we've actually really done a good job of trying to make sure that this is really usable for almost anybody. So the nice thing is having your own DXF files or active drawing files, be able to use these two options, which were there before, but they weren't probably as common knowledge. Having these two options right here, selected import files. So if you have say you have a program like AutoCAD, for example, AutoCAD does not output list files of any kind. So if you have just a bunch of files that you've created in AutoCAD and you want to nest those together and output them, you can use ATP. You don't have to have a cabinet design software. Or maybe you have just an active drawing. So you've created a drawing and a file inside of EnRoute that has multiple layers, and you want it to nest the Toolpath and nest it for you. You can use that. So ATP has more reach than just your cabinet software. You can use it in your everyday nesting and toolpathing, or from bringing files in from companies that don't offer list files. So it really does have a pretty wide range of uses as well. In fact, if you want to check out one of my videos, I think it was an older webinar, or maybe it was a Workflow Wednesday, that we did an episode on just specifically how you use the ATP Lite functions, which are basically don't include the design application. So using the selected import files or using an active drawing. So if you're more interested in those particular things, I check out our YouTube channel and check out the two playlists for our webinars and for the Workflow Wednesdays and see where that's at, because that might be something you'd be interested in checking out if you don't have a cabinet software that you particularly work with, because that could be also pretty helpful to you in your workflow if you're doing a lot of importing of files and stuff like that.
I got a couple questions here. Dana, in response to your question about a practice program for use, we don't necessarily have a practice program, but we do always offer a 7-day free trial of EnRoute. So if you head over to our website, thinksai.com, you can go to the EnRoute page and click the link to start a 7-day free trial if you want to try it out. And then Richard had a question: is there a good spot to email future development suggestions for ATP?
No, that's a really great question. There's actually, we don't have a specific email address, but you're more than welcome to email me. My email address is aaronc@thinksai.com. Or you can also email our eSupport, eSupport@thinksai.com. That will, either one will get to somebody, but if you want to email it to me directly, you can. Or you can email to eSupport@thinksai.com, and that will get filtered to the right location. So yeah, that's great. We're always we're excited about where ATP is going to go, as well as where it's at right now. So if you have suggestions, if you have things that you might think would be helpful in this kind of an application, feel free to send it. We don't shy away from that. We encourage feedback. So if you see something you think would be really amazing, send it to us. We'd love to hear it. And then we can forward that on to development as potential new upgrades to ATP.
All right. I posted Aaron's email there in the chat if anyone wanted to send an email to him. And I think that was all the questions we have for today. So we'll go ahead and close it out. Thank you all for joining us for today's EnRoute webinar. Make sure you're subscribed to our newsletter so you won't miss any webinar notifications or announcements. Thank you again for attending. We hope you learned something, and we'll see you next time.